In 2018, a Chinese scientist named He Jiankui secretly created the first genetically designed babies. His experiment produced twin girls, nicknamed Lulu and Nana, with immune systems enhanced to make them immune to HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. This experimentation laid the groundwork for any number of enhancements that could someday be purchased to make children smarter, stronger, better. In fact, Dr. He was setting up just such a commercial enterprise at the same time his first designer babies were born. The experiment and the mysterious disappearance of the scientist afterward is a drama that could easily have been torn from the scripts of science fiction films like Gattaca, Prometheus, or Blade Runner. Why did the Chinese government disappear Dr. He? And what happened to him? Where are the edited twin girls? Why did the international community support Dr. He's research and then abandon him?
These are the only genetically engineered children on the face of the earth.
In China, there is an old saying, 身正不怕影子斜.
The 21st century will be the century of biology.
The team behind this podcast met with Dr. He in 2018 while filming a documentary about gene editing in China. Our story unearthed more than just designer babies. The true story is that our civilization is at the cusp of a genomic revolution that will change everything. I'm Cody Sheehy, your host. I'm also the director of the documentary Make People Better, a film that tells the inside story of the first designer babies.
And I'm your co-host, Samira Kiani, a medical doctor, genetic engineer, and co-producer of the film. You're listening to the Make People Better podcast, brought to you by the RandomGood Foundation, where we introduce you to the greatest minds and most interesting people at the cusp of a genetic engineering revolution that is transforming science fiction into science fact.
In this hour, we sit down with the Chinese scientist, Dr. He, who created the first designer babies and is now out of prison. In this podcast, we refer to Dr. He as JK, which is his Western nickname. To our knowledge, this is the first interview that JK has given since the controversy and his disappearance. Now that 4 years has passed, we want to ask him some key questions the film couldn't answer. Where are the edited twins? Are they healthy? What is he going to do next? We will also speak with Dr. Ben Hurlbut, a prominent bioethicist, and we want his insight into why the communist government allowed JK to speak with Ben and our documentary team. But first, a word from our sponsors.
The Make People Better podcast is brought to you by the RandomGood Foundation.
The experiment that JK conducted on Lulu and Nana, which enhanced them to be resistant to the HIV virus, crossed many ethical boundaries and created an international uproar when it was leaked to the press. That was in 2018, and JK was roundly condemned by the scientific community and branded a rogue. Amid the controversy, the Chinese government quickly moved to make JK disappear. And 13 months later, he was fined and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Less known is the true story of the deep support JK enjoyed from the communist government officials and elite scientists in the US. Samara, I think this is a great time to dive in, and I just want to say it's great to hear your voice. We got to know each other really well while making this documentary, and I'm so excited to be doing this podcast with you.
Yes, the film focused on JK and the babies, which was kind of a moon landing moment for the field of genetic engineering. But in really infiltrating the world of gene editing to tell that story, we uncovered so many other amazing stories that all would have made great films.
It's going to be fascinating. First, I think we should introduce ourselves. And I want to start with you. You are so much more than just a producer of the film. You're also one of the world's top genetic engineers. And as a film director, having an insider like you as a partner in this film was amazing. That's why we got such great access. And I just want to ask you why you wanted to step away from doing science for a moment and take the time to actually make a film.
As an insider, I was really witnessing the power of this technology that can ultimately in future change the very definition of us as human beings and our relationship with each other and with nature. And so therefore, I was realizing that with this power comes a lot of responsibility. And there's a need for us to actually start a conversation and bring public to the table and have them involved in this, dialogue about the future we want to build.
That gap between what the public understands and what is actually happening is immense. And I think it's going to be a real problem if we don't somehow close that gap. But first, Samira, you mentioned that you're from Iran.
As you have noticed from my accent, I'm not from the US. I was born and raised in Iran. I could easily sense that many of the regulations that are put forth is based on the foundations of the culture and language of the Western countries. And for a person that comes from another culture or language, it can easily be misunderstood or misread, or it can be also interpreted within their own context of social or cultural norms. And I could see that in JK.
Yeah, that is such a powerful point. Different groups of people see the world differently. When someone looks at this technology, will they see the power to cure disease, or is it the power to make superhumans? I mean, depending on who you are, you're going to go a different direction with that. But let's bring it back to JK and the first designer babies. So I remember, Samira, when we were filming in 2018, we talked to a lot of people, and they all said that even though this was internationally banned, we kept hearing over and over that somebody was going to make the first gene-edited babies soon.
Yeah, I quite remember that. We were in Shenzhen researching who is going to be the next embryo editor, right? We were there with Antonio Regalado, the journalist that appears in the film. And we got an email that was from JK team. So we went there. It was a hotel in Guangzhou. We went there with Antonio Regalado and we met with JK and his team.
Every embryo develops for multiple cell stage. Then I get this.
His name is JK, is that it?
Yeah.
His Professor
JK. Professor
He.
He. The case that they presented is the largest research program in China with what sounds like, plans to advance to babies soon was the answer, pretty soon.
When Antonio met JK, even though JK didn't say it, Antonio, I think, knew immediately that JK was the one who was making babies. He just knew. And it's because he's been reporting in this field for so long.
I would like to, if you can hear me, ask Jiankui He to come to the stage.
Antonio released this story a few days before a major conference, the second summit on human application of genome engineering. And the press went crazy. The way Antonio released this story, how it came out was not how JK planned it.
In the course of the rest of our investigation, we eventually talked with JK's public relation person, and he explained to us how JK and his team actually planned to release the news very slowly. Very boring way with lots of scientists weighing in. I mean, JK wanted to be published in a major scientific journal like Nature before the public found out. And in fact, Nature was in the process of accepting his paper when the controversy broke, and then they stepped away. So it was Antonio's story and the way that it came out that really set the stage for a spectacle and the mayhem that just blew up their plan. And I think that's what really scared off a lot of the high-level scientists that JK had lined up in the West.
Chinese researcher has created an international controversy over the world's first genetically edited babies.
Supposedly giving these twin girls the ability to resist HIV infection.
Research was roundly condemned because it was shrouded in secrecy and broke with international scientific
Robin,
norms.
this type of experimentation is illegal here in the US and in most other countries.
Akin to Russian.
The babies didn't exist before the experiment. So one way to think about this is you're not fixing a disease. You're not curing someone with a disease because that disease didn't exist either. You're really creating babies to test out a technology just to see if that works. So they're an experiment. Their entire reason for being in the world was to be an experiment.
More intelligence, more talent, and the unaltered poor.
Changing the genetic code of the human race.
For generations.
For generations.
Premature, dangerous, and irresponsible. We have not heard the end of this story. It is going to cause massive uproar in the scientific and medical community.
Thank you.
And JK broke the deal he had made with the Chinese Communist Party. The deal was some controversy would be okay, but too much, and they wouldn't protect him.
And that's exactly what happened. I mean, they told him not to speak at the summit, but he did anyway. And after that, he was taken to China and disappeared so that no one could find him.
Not for a few weeks, but then Paul Mosher of the New York Times located where they were keeping him under house arrest.
Yes, Paul is one of the great investigative journalists at the Times, and he's one that I really admire. I mean, he's got a lot of guts.
We wait in the morning, we're trying to sort of see if he'll come out, and he doesn't come out. And at some point, we try to get in a bunch of different ways. So I try to get to the hallway, and this guy immediately stops me. And then all of a sudden, here come more, right? So they're all kind of flooding out. You know, He Jiankui got locked away with 12 secret police standing outside his door, guarding him, preventing people like me from going to talk to him.
Okay, here's the thing. The government don't want many views. I cannot talk to the journalists, but I do want some people to know what's really happening.
And that was the last time that anyone saw JK until very recently that he has started talking to our team again.
This might be a good place to bring in Ben Hurlbut. It took a long time, but over the years we built a lot of trust with Ben, and he finally agreed to be kind of the main subject of our film. I've learned that Ben is just so much more than a professor. He is someone who makes sure that he knows everyone and everything that's going on. And to me, his work is truly fascinating. So, Ben, thank you for sitting down with us. And again, it's kind of fun to have the whole crew back together in the sense that we've interviewed you so many different times during the making of our documentary. And I think it's great to start out this podcast series by really talking with you and getting a sense of what's happened since.
It's great to get the band back together here. So I am an associate professor of life sciences at Arizona State University. I'm trained actually as a historian of science, a historian and sociologist. And what I do is study the debates around biotechnology, but also the ways that different societies have developed institutions to respond to the kinds of issues and controversies that have emerged around bioresearch, biotechnology, biomedicine, and so forth. The story of the CRISPR babies was obviously, it was a really important and remarkable moment in itself, but it was also very much embedded in a whole sort of sweep of developments and approaches that, you know, go back decades.
I think this might be a good time to tell us a little bit more about how you originally connected with JK.
It happened that we were both in this meeting at the Innovative Genomics Institute at UC Berkeley, which is run by Jennifer Doudna, who won the Nobel Prize for developing CRISPR-Cas9, along with Emmanuel Charpentier. She had encountered JK. I think he had emailed her and wanted to talk, and maybe they met a few weeks before. Somehow or other, she was aware that he was in the area and said, you know, we should probably have somebody from China.
And why is China important? I mean, China's a big player in where these technologies are going.
Yeah, I mean, China is a big player. Part of what China has done with the enormous amount of wealth that it has generated is to funnel it into science and technology. And the idea is to leapfrog, if possible, over the Western scientific and technological powerhouses and take their position on the global stage at the forefront of science and technology, because whoever has the know-how to make the technologies also will enjoy the economic benefits and will control the trajectory. I mean, there's strategic, economic, all kinds of reasons for wanting to be in that position. I mean, that's what the Chinese have sought to do. I mean, JK's view was he's a Chinese scientist working in China. He answers to China. JK seemed to think that he was the one who could judge that, but so too are other figures in the scientific community.
Ben, going back to the film and the story of JK, have you been in communication with him?
Yeah, I've had a good number of conversations with him since he was released from prison.
And what does he want to talk about when he talks to you?
He'd been in prison without contact with essentially anybody for a very long time. And he wanted to hear from me where he stands. What's my take on what's happened in the years since he was taken away? JK was totally ignorant of all that unfolded around him once he essentially lost his internet connection in end of July 2019. Right. It was a kind of black box for him.
Was he shocked to find out what the world reaction had been and all the things that had gone on?
Well, he had been under house arrest during the period when much of that reaction took place. Right. And so that was, he was aware of that.
So this is the period of time that he's under house arrest and has disappeared from the public. This is the same period of time that he starts calling you directly. What I can't figure out is while he's on the phone with you, telling you all of these things, there's 12 secret police surrounding the outside of his apartment. So he was not able to talk to journalists, but why were they allowing him to talk to anyone in the West? Why did he even have a cell phone?
Right. That's a very good question. So he was strictly prohibited from talking to journalists, or rather he was advised that he shouldn't. And yet he wasn't prevented from talking to others. He knew what I do, and I think that he thought that I was a trustworthy person to take the oral history, basically, kind of hear and capture the full story.
There's somebody in the government who makes the decision to surround him with 12 guards. Why would those guards allow JK to have a phone and make any kind of decision about who he might want to talk to? Yeah, I mean, when the intent from above obviously is that he would be silent, I guess.
Right. It's a really good question. And honestly, I don't totally know the answer to it. I think that those guys around his door, I think their job was just to not let him out of it. I think that was their primary. I mean, it was clearly not to keep him from talking to people.
But at the same time, articles about JK's experiment that were initially very positive and were released in the Chinese press were being retracted and removed from the internet. And it actually went on to become one of the most censored topics in China after that. So internally to China, the story essentially disappears.
Right. I think that the focus of Chinese censorship was China. The concern was about, how it would impact sort of Chinese society and Chinese social stability. Maybe the thought was that if he is simply disappeared, that it would reflect badly on China. There was a point in our calls where I asked him if he thought this call was being reported, and he assured me that he was sure that it wasn't, or that whether it was being monitored. And it was pretty clear to me in that exchange that he definitely thought that it was, and I also assumed that it was. Yeah. But maybe the fact that it was, maybe that was his reason for telling me all of these things, that he wanted them to be publicly known.
I like this explanation because it's like the goons on the outside are only in charge of the physical world, and there's probably other goons somewhere else that are in charge of the digital world.
It was more international, right, than just China. So partly might be a motivation for China to let the bigger story to be told.
He, in a sense, had an agenda. And in particular, he really wanted to talk about his ethics process and the consent process, because the response at the summit and after had been that, he must have botched the ethics process because obviously this was unethical. And I think that was a thing that he was genuinely concerned about setting the record straight on, because he had done his level best to kind of do the ethics process right, to dot his I's and cross his T's. When push came to shove, the ethics committee at the hospital that had approved his experiment denied that they had approved it. There is no credibility, as far as I can tell, to that denial. It was just running for the exits.
And there were signatures on that for the...
There are signatures on it from the people. It was...
By denying it, they're claiming it was forged.
And the guy who was head of the hospital and oversees the ethics committee gave an interview to the Associated Press and had his picture taken by the AP photographer. Give me a break. Of course, the scientific community, the Western press, et cetera, they latched onto that accusation of forgery because, it just looks like fraud, and then it's straightforwardly criminal. And
it fits neatly into the rogue narrative.
Exactly. It fits neatly into the rogue narrative. And I think one of the main things that he wanted to do was to set the record straight on that. But I had a lot of questions about other things as well. So just for example, in his account of how everything had happened, he made no mention of John Zhang until I asked him about it.
John Zhang is an important figure because, well, maybe you can explain who John Zhang is.
Yeah, so John Zhang is a fertility doctor and embryologist based in New York City. He runs the New Hope Fertility Clinic. I mean, he runs a big business. He has operations in numerous countries. He's a highly successful physician, highly successful fertility medicine practice. JK kind of reached out to him and went to see him in the summer of 2018. And I think Zhang saw a real opportunity here, and they immediately linked up, and he made a trip to China. Zhang, of course, is Chinese originally, did a PhD at the University of Cambridge in the UK, settled in New York, built up a very successful business. He made a trip in August and then again in October, and they had this sort of partnership that they were developing to make a big international operation for fertility medicine, including genome editing.
And what happened to John Zhang after JK got arrested?
Nothing. He's still in business. He's doing his thing.
So our documentary team also reached out to him. And Ben, how does John Zhang handle that in each of these cases?
Well, he was willing to talk to me. We talked twice. As soon as I came close to addressing his own direct engagement with the project and his commercial venture with JK, he just simply ended the conversation. I mean, we were on Zoom, and he fumbled around for about 5 seconds looking for the end meeting button before he suddenly disappeared. I saw him a few weeks later at the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. When he recognized me, he turned around and ran the other direction about as fast as he possibly could. He has obviously no interest in commenting in any way on this because he hopes it just sort of goes away and doesn't affect things for him. But he's present, he was involved.
Wow. And what about other scientists who supported JK and then abandoned him?
Yeah, okay. So there were a number of people who were kind of close in on this thing. As things went the way they did, dropped JK and that was that, and hoped that nobody knew anything about that relationship.
What about Michael Deem? What happened to him?
Okay, so Michael Deem is sort of an interesting and sad case. Deem was JK's doctoral supervisor. JK has this kind of loyalty to people and engaged Deem in his business dealings and various other things. And so Deem was actually close in on this project from the very start. Not that he brought any expertise to the project, but he was perfectly knowledgeable about what the purpose of the project was and what was happening in it, as far as I can tell, even to the point of being present in the consent meetings with at least some of the couples who participated in the experiment.
And why do you think he was present in the consent meetings with the parents of the babies where they agreed to do this experiment? Why do you think he was there?
I don't know. It's interesting to be on the front line.
But how do you know that he was there?
Well, I know he was there because I have seen the video. I have the video in which he is present.
I've seen the video too. And when the meeting starts, Deem looks at the camera and realizes that he's being filmed, and he gets up and leaves.
The video is quite a bit longer than that. What actually happens is he walks over next to JK. JK introduces him to the couple. They exchange some sort of pleasantries in Mandarin. And then that's it. You don't see Deem again, unless you look carefully at the video screen that's on the wall behind the couple, in which you can see Deem's reflection. Deem is simply sitting at the other end of the table outside of the frame of the camera, but is present, throughout at least the video of the consent, which is a good chunk of the consent conversation. His fingerprints were sufficiently present on the project that it was obligatory for his university to conduct an investigation. He was a professor at Rice University. Rice undertook an investigation. Deem lawyered up. If journalists asked him things, he would direct them to his lawyers. They gave a sort of canned statement or whatever, basically denying all of this. The investigation dragged on and on and on. It's never been completed, as far as I know, never issued any kind of finding, but it has in effect gone away because Deem quietly resigned from Rice University, which is not something that a tenured professor normally does. I think it was clearly to make the situation go away. But, others were, actively kind of knowledgeable about and engaged with the project. Stephen Quake is one of those people. He was JK's postdoctoral advisor at Stanford. He's a pretty big shot in the domain of biomedicine and biotechnology. He's essentially the leader of the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub, which is the foundation established, the very rich foundation established by Mark Zuckerberg for biomedical research. And, Quake wasn't exactly a major cheerleader for this, but he was perfectly knowledgeable about what was going on. He was consulted when there was a big debate about whether to publish the results and how to publish the results. Just after the babies were born, they consulted Quake. Quake weighed in. He held a lot of sway with JK. JK really looked up to him. If Quake had said to him, "Don't do it," I think it's essentially guaranteed he wouldn't have done it.
And what happened to him?
He's still a professor at Stanford. Stanford did an investigation to see if there was any wrongdoing. Of course, it's a sealed investigation. They determined there was no wrongdoing. That's that.
Ben, where are the babies now? Are they healthy? Is there any information about the babies?
All I know about the babies, I have had via JK and one or two of his close associates. My understanding is that what they have reported is that the babies are healthy and fine. Of course, I have absolutely no way of verifying that.
Did any American or other international scientists get access to babies or their data?
No, not to my knowledge.
China is somehow hiding the babies, or?
The parents of the babies, as I understand it, have absolutely no desire for it to be known that these are the edited babies, or for that matter, that these are their parents. One of the major reasons for that is that if you found out who the babies were, you would know who the parents are, and then you would know that the father of the babies has HIV, which would be bad news for that guy. And
a lot of Americans may not understand the level of stigma that is still associated with HIV in China. And that would be a major life-changing event for these parents.
It's not uncommon for people whose HIV status is found out to pull up roots, abandon their lives, move somewhere else in the country, change their names, start over from scratch because of the stigma associated with and the consequences that stigma has for.
To our knowledge, no Western scientists have had access to data or access to the kids.
No. A lot of them have called for getting access, which I find a little appalling, frankly. The notion that the objection to this experiment, which I agree with absolutely, is that these children were made an experiment and they shouldn't have been, right? I absolutely agree with that. So why would you then want to continue the experiment? Why do you want the data from the experiment? It's juicy, interesting data. These are the only genetically engineered children on the face of the earth.
Do you think we'll ever know their identities?
I hope not. Our desire to know more about them is not for them.
We are about to talk with Jiankui He for the very first time on the record anyways.
Yeah.
He's told us that there's a lot of things that he is not willing to answer or even discuss.
The last time that we spoke to him off the record, I was like a little disappointed. I wish he was more reflective. But when I talked to him, I was like, something changed in me. Something like we might not be in the same wavelength.
It validated some of the criticism towards him. It revealed to me that his ambition was really the strongest part of his personality that was driving his decision making. So how are you doing? It's been a few weeks since we had a chance to talk, and everything going okay with you?
Oh, it's great. Yeah, I got back to Beijing now, so I start to work today.
Wonderful. How are the girls doing? Are they healthy, or, can provide any update about them?
Lulu and Nana are living happily with their parents now.
And the summit, you mentioned there was a plan to monitor their health up until they turn 18.
I opposed to their idea. The Lulu and Nana and their family are living, a peaceful, normal, non-disturbed life. That's their will, and we should respect them.
How has your return to the public been received so far?
Oh, I'm starting a not-for-profit research institute. The institute is dedicated to find a cure for rare genetic diseases. So the first disease we want to cure is DMD. It's Duchenne muscular dystrophy. The DMD patients usually die before 20s. There's no cure.
So I can totally understand that, there's a lot of need for these patients. But are you thinking of germline or somatic cell gene editing in this case?
So it's going to be somatic gene editing and gene therapy, and it's going to be used for children and adult.
That's wonderful. In the greater scheme of your life, where are you right now? What do you hope for your career?
For me, I have this vision for my career of this technology. Let's make it in one sentence: is everyone deserves freedom from genetic disease.
I want to know how your experience with Lulu and Nana have now influenced your current career decision. Has anything changed or matured into something different in you?
I haven't think of this yet. I currently don't have an answer for that.
Do you think the world would look back on you and your career very differently than, say, how it reacted the very first time with Lulu and Nana?
I hope one day we going to be free of genetic diseases.
What do you think the ethics are around using it for any other purposes?
I oppose the gene editing to be used for enhancement.
It feels like scientists are moving forward and not reflective about the changes to society that all this will cause, and that the public is not involved in these decisions. I'm curious what you would say to that group.
Well, so every day there's with the genetic disease calling me, email me. Well, there's thousands of people contact me, and they want me to help them find a cure. So we should have this mercy for these families in need.
What's your response to the people who say you shouldn't have another chance?
In China, there is an old saying, 身正不怕影子斜. I encourage you to check that.
Sorry about the internet lags.
Yeah.
Hopefully it all wasn't too bad.
Okay.
Thank you, JK.
Good. It's very good talking with you.
Okay, we just hung up with JK, and I don't even know what to make of the whole thing. What's your reaction?
Obviously, he had this kind of like specific type of answers he wanted to give us, and it was very rehearsed.
Yeah, it's been a long road to build enough trust with him to do this interview to begin with. I'm glad that he just showed up for the first time ever. He doesn't do interviews.
One of the questions we should ask is that how we can prevent something like JK to happen again.
The best person to probably address that would be Dr. Ben Hurlbut. You know what we should do is go back and ask him, now that we've talked to JK, and see what he thinks.
My overwhelming sense is that JK believed that what he was doing is good. Why did he believe it was good? Because his colleagues, when they were speaking honestly behind closed doors, told him that this is the future. JK would talk in his sort of honest moments about how human evolution has not kept up with the evolution of technology, and that it was the responsibility of a technologist like him and of his community of technologists to accelerate human evolution.
It's a really more fundamental question of, in order to prevent something like JK to happen again, really we need to go back and ask how we perform innovation, how we do science.
The game is about staying ahead of the next guys. And, for JK, that was a very important thing. I mean, he was thinking about this as a first for himself, but also for China that would set both him and China apart, right? So that's the kind of competitiveness direction. That's just a kind of general dynamic. I think a second dynamic that's at play here, though, is the sense of power, the thrill of it. I mean, this is about control over life and control over the most, you might say, most important form of life, human life at its inception. And it's taking the power out of the hands of nature to shape us and putting it into our own hands, or rather putting it into the hands of a select few who are adept at wielding the technology. I think that dimension of the thrill, the sense of power, the sense of control is, no small part of this story, coupled with the notion that that power can be wielded in beneficial ways. And yeah, indeed, maybe it can be. But it's the power to be able to save lives. The third thing that I would say is that it's not the case that everyone in the scientific community is a kind of competitive and reckless thrill seeker. There are many people who are reflective and who pull back, and many people who called for pulling back in this domain as in other domains. But one of the things that's notable in calling for slowing down, in calling for hitting the brakes, many of those people have sort of unreflectively put themselves forward as the people who should make the call whether we should hit the brakes, which also then positions them as the people to make the call for when we should hit the throttle. And, one of the things that happened in response to JK and his experiment was the notion that we actually needed to hit the throttle. Like somebody else had hit the throttle. We're done slowing down. Now we need to speed up and figure out how to do this right. Really? I mean, is it their call whether we should do it and what right means in the first place? So I think that even where there is a sense of an imperative for reflection and for caution and so forth, there's also an arrogance associated with that.
Yeah. What is other areas that you find important to focus on and for us to reflect upon?
I mean, I think the range of areas is enormous. And actually, the way I am inclined to approach it is not so much to say, oh, these kind of technologies are coming and we better worry about it. We better react to those technologies. That's sort of what's become the kind of standard mode of bioethics. To me, the important questions are more fundamental than that. What is causing these technologies to come? What are the imaginations of the future, the ideas of what would be good and beneficial for us, the interests, the desires, the hunger for profit, etc., that are driving them forward? And who is in the driver's seat? What is driving them to head down that path? A path that when the rest of us take a look at it, we have serious reservations about. And yet, oftentimes, I think almost universally, the question about whether we have serious reservations, in effect, doesn't come up until it's right on the threshold, or in fact, it's already happened. And those, to me, are the fundamental questions.
In creating this documentary, there was such a broad range of storylines that we could have focused on. All the money that's being poured into genetics to find a way to reverse aging. It could have been about these extremely powerful new tools that we're building that will completely reshape natural ecosystems. An example of that would be gene drives. And I mean, there's got to be a real thrill in having that kind of power for sure. Then there's the really scary stuff, like someone creating a synthetic virus that would cause a severe pandemic. So bioterror, or even just bioerror, which is an accidental release from a research lab. This risk is the kind of thing that is dovetailing with a whole nother fascinating angle, which is a community of do-it-yourself biohackers. Turns out that doing genetic engineering is actually really cheap and it's easy, and these people are setting up labs in their garages. there's more. I mean, how we're going to manufacture chemicals, how we're going to produce our food, of course. All of this is part of a genomic revolution. And that is what is so exciting about this podcast series, is we're going to cover all of it. But Ben, what are your thoughts on the revolution?
Yeah, so people say that, the 19th century was the century of chemistry and the 20th century was the century of physics with the rise of the bomb and so forth, and that the 21st century will be the century of biology. It's right. I mean, we are well into a quite extraordinary revolution in the development of capacity to intervene in and control life. But the capacity to intervene isn't the same thing as the capacity to understand. Not only not totally understanding the biology of the disease, but the meaning of disease in people's lives, the meaning of suffering, the meaning of mortality, the meaning of the sort of infirmities and vulnerabilities that go along with being human, living in a biosphere. And the notion that these tools will give us the means to rectify all that is deficient in life as it has evolved. And yet, that's the sort of first step in what is explicitly presented by the people who've developed those technologies as a project of intervening in evolution, to quote unquote sculpt it, to make it better. So making people better is only one piece of a larger project of bettering life. That is a project that is, increasingly feasible, but boy, is it hubristic. And if we think that we have the wisdom to wield these technologies to achieve better, boy, are we mistaken. The challenge then is not so much to develop the tools, but to develop the wisdom necessary to use those tools well. And on that, there may be a revolution in biology, but there has not been yet a revolution in wisdom.
Wow. Well, I think we got to stop here for this episode.
That was well said. Thank you.
Well, you guys will slice and dice it.
Before we go, there's one loose end that we need to clean up. In our interview with JK, he told us,
in China, there is an old saying, 身正不怕影子斜.
It means one does not need to worry about rumors if one is upright.
Join us for the next episode, where we will be exploring the technological race for immortality. It is the ultimate prize for humans, who are a species that can imagine the future and our own eventual death. In recent years, genetic science has transformed that quest into a technological one for biotech companies and visionaries. We will visit the largest cryo-freezing facility in the world and go to the front lines of longevity, where testing is well underway to radically extend the life of one of our best furry friends, the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel.
Please support this podcast by sharing it and leave us a review. We would also love to add your voice to this conversation. We'll be hosting a live discussion around this topic, and you're invited to join. Check out the show notes for details. The Make People Better podcast is brought to you by the RandomGood Foundation. Thanks, and we'll talk with you again soon.